Welcome to the Edutrends, brought to you by the Institute for the Future of Education. This is a Tech Sounds podcast, the official podcast platform of Tecnológico de Monterrey. I am José Pepe Escamilla, Associate Director of the Institute for the Future of Education. Today's guest is Bryan Alexander, a senior scholar of Georgetown University. He's a futurist, researcher, writer, speaker, and consultant, among other roles. Bryan, it's a pleasure to have you here on our podcast.
Well, it's a delight to see you again, Jose, and it's always good to work with Tecnológico de Monterrey. Your observatory does great work. I'm a big fan, and so I'm really happy to have some time with you.
Thank you, Bryan, and thanks for being with us. So I will like to ask you a first question that is more like a personal. How did you become an educational futurist? What inspired you to choose such a career?
Oh, it's a good question. For about 15 years, I worked with a nonprofit that worked with small colleges in the United States. So we worked for between 1 and 200 colleges, and I was their director of emerging technology. So I would help them deal with what were then new and emerging technologies like mobile devices and social media. And I found that as I was doing that work, a lot of the campuses were very interested in the technology until they weren't. And then they would outsource the technological thinking to their chief information officer or to their IT leaders, or they would simply say, I don't think technology matters that much. And this worried me. I didn't like not being able to connect with people on a given campus. So what I did was I realized that my work was actually more about the future in general. So I was working on how demographics impacted technology, how economics changed colleges and universities. So I reframed what I was doing in terms of the future. I threw myself into future studies and then brought that back to campuses and said, let's talk about the future of higher education. And then everybody would be interested. People who said they hated technology would be interested in talking about technology. All kinds of questions would occur. The discussions would get a lot better. And I've been doing that ever since.
That's a very interesting story, Bryan. You know, you're also a very good storyteller.
Oh, well, that's very kind. Thank you.
Don't you think so?
I've done a lot of work on teaching people to tell stories. So
Okay.
that was my first book was actually about digital storytelling. I've done many workshops at helping people teach stories with digital video, with digital audio, with web pages, and so on.
Yes. And you're talking about one of your books. I want to also ask you a question about one of your last book, I think, is on climate change and higher education.
Yes.
So what are the recommendations that you can give institutions to address this important issue?
Well, if my cat doesn't obscure it, you can see the book right here. Its title is Universities on Fire. And I recommend that universities and colleges address climate change right now, and they do so through multiple levels. One of those levels is the physical campus. So, for example, some Mexican campuses, especially in the north, are in very dry, arid areas where they may be running into desertification. Some of the campuses on the south and in the east of Mexico are instead much more vulnerable to to hurricanes and storms. And so a lot of campuses around the world have to become more resilient physically. They also have to rethink their role in contributing to climate change. So they have to decarbonize their campuses. And that may take the form, for example, of building new buildings or redesigning current buildings in order to reduce their carbon footprint. It may involve reducing their physical transportation to the extent that it emits greenhouse gases. So, for example, flying less, or perhaps switching cars that burn fossil fuels for electrical vehicles, and so on. There's quite a few different components to that. That's just one level. A second level is our research enterprise. That's in many ways the biggest contribution that academia has given to the whole climate activism world, is that we do so much research from everything from changes in earth science to meteorology to chemistry to the social sciences. For example, how does our political environment change? Your nation right now, for example, has one of the few global leaders who actually has professional expertise in climate change. Looking at economics, how do we fund climate adaptation? And then even the humanities, how do we tell stories about climate? How do we think through the ethics of this under philosophy and so on? So there's a lot of room for campus faculty and staff, as well as students, to do more research in this field. Then there's a third layer, which is in many ways what most people think is our most important function, which is teaching and learning. So we should teach more about climate change and do so with more classes, more curricular locations, and more opportunities for students to be able to learn more about the world that they're inhabiting. And beyond that is what we in the U.S. call town-gown relations. That is the relationships between a community and its campus. So, to what extent do we have positive relationships? Do we, for example, open cooling shelters in hotter times for the community to use? Do we have combination projects such as building solar panels or building a wind turbine that both the community and the campus can use? As well as how do we cope with clashes between them, when the community and the campus have very different ideas. And beyond that is the idea of academics working on the world stage. To how, if this is the greatest crisis facing human civilization, what can we contribute to the world beyond our teaching, beyond our research, beyond changing our physical campuses? Can we work, for example, to share our knowledge with a broader public? Can we instead perhaps work with businesses or governments to try to help them change their policies? So those are the 5 different levels. It's a lot. It's a huge topic. But those are my 5 main levels of response.
Very good way of once again the storytelling, Bryan. Very good way of organizing all the important issues in universities. So I would like to follow up on that. Do you think that universities are well placed to have an important role in fighting this climate change problems? And also, do you think universities are doing a good work at that, or where will you place them on a scale from 1 to 10, maybe?
Oh, I'd say we're around 2 right now. I mean, we have some researchers who, as I said before, contribute research. So if you take a look at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC reports, so much of that research is done by academics, and that's a key part. And we also have some teaching going on right now. But right now, it's still early days. I think a lot of academics have other commitments, or they find the problem to be too terrifying, or they feel that they can't do very much to work with it. Many university presidents and rectors that I speak with, they fear that the subject is too risky politically, and they don't want to get involved. But I think we have so much capacity. I mean, if you look around the world, we have hundreds of millions of students. Ultimately, it's a tremendous number of people who will go on to become workers, creators, CEOs, designers of new technologies, heads of government. And so that's a huge amount of influence that we have, that we could really help better prepare humanity to grapple with this crisis. But we also have, as I mentioned before, our research, which can contribute to the whole world. And also, I think even on the small level of our individual campuses, where we can really make examples, and that might be research and development, where we try something new that hasn't been done before, hasn't been done locally. I've seen some fascinating projects of people building new types of wind turbine engines. One university in Atlanta was working with embedding solar panels into streets, which I don't know if it'll work. It's an interesting idea, but to try that out and then to, try and anticipate the future, I think we can play a real leadership role in that.
Very, very interesting. I see some similarities with blue. It's Ruta Azul in Spanish. It's like a blue way or blue route. And I will connect you with Luis Fernandez, who is doing some great work there also.
Please.
So you can connect and exchange ideas. And I want to connect now this to the next subject. So we will be talking about AI, and in particular, I think generative AI, but we can talk freely about AI.
Yes,
and
indeed.
AI has also been on the spot because it's very costly in terms of computing power, and the carbon print of it is very big. What do you think about that implication of the use of generative AI?
Well, we know that generative AI has a huge carbon footprint, and for listeners and watchers who haven't been following this, the main reason is that generative AI applications require enormous data sets. So if the data set is text, or if it's images, video, or audio, The key thing here is enormous amounts of stuff. So that all has to be, brought together, and then it has to be processed and analyzed meticulously in great detail. And all of that requires a lot of servers, a lot of GPUs doing a lot of cycles. And then when it's all done, when you have an application that's ready to serve, any query also requires more of that analysis. And that may seem to us to happen at great speed, but it really requires a great deal of processing. But all of that has huge electricity demands. Now, I think these are in some ways overstated. I think some technologies, I mean, cloud computing in general uses a lot more than AI. So when we're streaming videos on Netflix or if we're using Zoom, we're contributing to using more and more electricity. But overall, this is causing some to try to expand our installed base of electricity production. So you're seeing some in China, for example, calling for more coal plants, power plants that burn coal. We're also seeing in the United States more calls for restarting or creating new nuclear power plants. And this is definitely a challenge. And allied to that is that all this electricity, all this work requires a great deal of cooling. And a powerful cooling is fresh water. The world itself right now is not doing well in fresh water. We have a great deal of scarcity in large chunks of the world, especially around the equator. And so diverting fresh water to this use seems, quite inhumane. Those are challenges. I haven't seen a lot of academic institutions taking that seriously. And I think one reason is because we haven't really thought about our electrical footprint, our carbon emissions footprint that seriously. So I haven't seen a campus, for example, that bans Bitcoin mining, even though Bitcoin mining is incredibly technology intensive and uses a lot of electricity by design. I haven't seen campuses try to reduce the amount of air travel that they do, even though right now, whereas ground vehicles, automobiles, we have a really healthy electric vehicle ecosystem. We don't have that yet for air travel. So that's something I would love to see that changed. Um, but overall, I don't think this is something that academics are taking too seriously. We might see policymakers do more of this. So perhaps the European Union will impose a carbon tax on anybody doing this kind of work in the European Union, or perhaps at the consumer side. So someone's producing this technology elsewhere, say in the United States or China, but the users are in the European Union and they may have to pay a tax for this. I don't expect the United States will do this within the next 4 years. Perhaps your President Scheinbaum will do this in her term of office.
Yes, yes, you're right. I don't see that happening in Mexico. I have heard of some anecdotes or areas or people that in universities that do not travel, but I don't think it's an institutional policy. I think it's in France where they announced that trips that are shorter than
Mhm.
500 kilometers, you could not fly there starting in 2026. So you
Yeah,
have to use the train, except for those places where there's not a good train connection. And
right.
I think that it's also being replicated in other countries, or look upon in other countries to use means of transportation that are less pollutant. But we need more conscious there, and you're right. So, we were talking about generative AI. We started to talk about generative AI. And I will now talk more about the benefits of generative AI for higher education. Uh, we're recording this on the 2nd of December 2024. So 2 days ago, it was OpenAI second anniversary of being public, so being well known by the world. These kind of technologies usually have a lot of hype, and then we really know what they are. Do you think that the hype has faded, and we really know what we can do with generative AI, or still too soon?
I think there is still a large amount of hype, not as much as before. I think in part because it's been 2 years since ChatGPT 3.5 really kicked it off. And there's been more and more people are actually using the stuff, so they're more familiar with it. And I think a lot of media attention has either faded or moved on to other things. But there is still a lot of excitement and a lot of curiosity. And beyond the hype, more important than that, is a huge amount of investment. I mean, there are tens of billions of dollars pouring into generative AI. Just in the U.S., there's a lot going into this in Europe, especially looking at England and looking at Poland, and China is very very committed to AI, and both the state and the corporations there are pouring a lot of money into this. So that's pushing it further. And within the generative AI world, there is such a torrent of innovation going on. I mean, everything from trying to improve speed of outputs, trying to create more multimodal inputs, trying now to crack how to do video outputs that last more than a few seconds, and just all kinds of now the shift towards agent-based AI, for example, so that you can tell your AI to go buy cat food and pick the best price for it, or to arrange for me a wonderful visit to Mexico. I mean, agent-based computing is actually incredibly complex. There needs to be an elaborate ecosystem for that to work in terms of permissions, in terms of standards, not to mention concerns about safety and so on. But that's a big push right now. In terms of what higher education is dealing with, I think in many ways we're aware of a lot of the uses. Now, I have to caution though, there is not good research on this. A lot of what I've been seeing has been self-reporting, and the problem with that is that some number of people will find AI to be illicit or illegal or just somewhat a bad character, and they'll be less inclined to say, yes, I use AI. It's much like if you ask people about their alcohol consumption or their sex lives or about their drug use. There are a lot of reasons not to answer correctly. But you also may see people who don't use the technology who say they do because they want to look current. They want to look exciting. So a lot of that data is unreliable right now. But we have seen a few uses. I mean, one is simply making stuff. So that being able to use generative AI to produce text, to produce code, to produce images, to produce sound. And we're seeing that all over the place. We're seeing that in the research function of higher education, where people are building out articles or doing document reviews. We're seeing it in terms of operations, where people are producing web content. They're summarizing articles. They're writing stuff that they're not interested in writing or they have a hard time doing. One chief information officer told me he knew that one of his staff had started using AI. I said, how? It's because his memos became good. I said, okay, that makes sense. I mean, you could see that happening. In the classroom, the uses are much more complex because we have the making stuff side of it. So we have students using generative AI to produce papers, reports, PowerPoint presentations, all kinds of content. We're seeing faculty do the same. You're producing syllabi and assignments. But we're also seeing a second use of generative AI that I find so fascinating and is not nearly as popular, which is the idea of AI as a conversation partner. And that might the conversation partner might be someone who brainstorms a paper with you. It might be someone who's trying to cheer you up. It might be someone who is working with you as a Socratic opponent, asking you questions. It might be someone who works with you as a therapist or as a friend or as a romantic partner. I mean, UNESCO has a taxonomy of, I think, 14 different categories. That is a whole set of options that can work in all kinds of ways, some of which are not good. I mean, we've already seen some possibilities of conversational bots going in bad directions. And of course, when you think about the possibility of someone using AI and not doing the mental work to learn, then when I'm studying Spanish in my awful, terrible way, I have to work to remember vocabulary. I have to try to conjugate verbs correctly. I'm still struggling with hacer. But if I can have AI do that for me, I lose that work. But there's a third category, and this is one which I think is almost invisible. Nobody talks about this, which is simulations. I can ask ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude or Copilot to simulate a situation for me and allow me to interact with it. So I was in Cuernavaca a few months ago. And to demonstrate this, I had ChatGPT simulate a human expedition to the moon. And it had to describe for me the spacecraft. It had to describe for me the trajectory down to the meter. It had to build a crew for me and had to give me options along the way. What date do I leave? How much velocity is needed? What kind of orbital insertion do I do? And along the way, this was fascinating. I was learning a lot, but also I didn't think it was hard enough. So I asked it to make it more challenging, and it did. I lost a couple of astronauts along the way. We can do that simulation for ancient Roman history, or being inside of a hurricane, or managing the United Nations. So I think that simulation power is really great, and we should pay more attention to it.
Mhm.
So those things, the simulations, the conversation, the making stuff, those are some of the big uses that I'm seeing now.
Thank you, Brian. So I agree with you. So one of the first things is for me it's difficult to say that the hype is over or that we already know what we can do with that is the huge amount of investment that is going on and the development so that generative AI is still like a moving target. We don't know where it will go for, let's say, the following 6 months, what the new versions or the new things will be able to do. And you mentioned many of them. One of the drawbacks, I think, is to deal with inaccuracies. No? So in general, in computer computer systems, IT systems, we expect 99.9999 of how you say resilience or
Accuracy.
accuracy. Well, accuracy 100%, but I mean that you can rely, reliance on that. And the problem with generative AI is that I haven't seen a study about that, but I believe it will be, my expectation is that maybe 70, 80%, depending on what you ask. No, so for instance, if I use generative AI to help me with something, I expect that I will check it before I send it to someone else. So there's still human intervention all the time. So it's like an assistant that speed up stuff, but it's not something that can be completely. I can completely rely on that. No, so that's one of the reasons that I believe many of the things that we are saying it will be done. It's not. It's not going to be a 100% thing. No, there will always be human intervention. That's what I think about right now. And I have talked to other people in AI, and they think that the problem is exponentially so big that achieving something close to 99% will be very difficult. No, at least with the methods that we have right now. And on the other hand, we need to better understand this, and we need, as you say, more research. And there's a lot of data that is, as you say, self-reported data. I know of a university that asks who is using generative AI, and there's 500 professors say I am using. We will give you free licenses of, or we will pay for license of open ChatGPT or whatever. And they found out that really there were like maybe 10% of those people really, or maybe less, like 1%, using those license, not because people report stuff because it makes sense. So we also have a plan in our university about AI that has four big pillars. So one is the impact on teaching and learning. The second one is the impact on research as a research tool.
Yes.
And the third one is in administrative process and efficiency. And the fourth one is AI as a discipline. So how we have more studies and things going on that. So we have several committees. And in fact, for instance, in the teaching learning part, we decided to continue our growth of adaptive learning courses. That we already had like maybe 10 courses for initial courses of students using, I would say, traditional AI tutors, adaptive learning, and we're growing that. This year, I think we are on 16, and next year we will be growing because we have developed a lot of capabilities, internal capabilities to build them and to test them and to know that they are, in average, maybe they increase 25% the results of students on what we do in terms of learning outputs. So why will we abandon that if that's working? So what we believe that generative AI could have other uses, like for instance, helping creating materials, helping giving
Mhm.
feedback and evaluation, helping maybe developing some kind of bots or things that are more basic, or tutors for courses that doesn't have the number of students that we have in initial courses, so that you need to build something that is most cost effective now because you have a smaller number of students. But that's where we are right now.
Mm. There's so much in what you said. If I could, the keeping humans in the loop is a phrase I'm hearing a great deal. I'm hearing this from Europe. I'm hearing this from the U.S. Uh, and I'm hearing that partly from the robot world, where people are talking about, to what extent should we have autonomous cars, autonomous drones in warfare or for policing. And there's always that phrase, keep a human in the loop, which I think is pretty sane, and we'll probably see more of. I think it's a good way of thinking about generative AI in general. We need to be careful to check it and counter check it, because we don't have a solution. RAG software is an interesting approach. I saw an interesting Chinese project to basically use one generative AI tool to correct another. Google right now has an interesting thing where you use their generative AI and then you can use their Google search to correct it, which is interesting. But for humans, in some ways, this isn't much of a problem. If I'm having a conversation about history, if I'm having a conversation on my mental health, in many ways, we can keep going. We can ride with that. But if I'm new to a field, if I'm trying to learn a language I don't know, like Hungarian, um, I can't afford to have any mistakes. And if I'm doing something that has real world physical applications to health, uh, of course, thinking about surgery, for example, this is something where you really want to have a professional there. But I think in many ways humans are happy to use these, perhaps knowing the risks, perhaps not knowing them. And that is a challenge for educators. We have to teach our students how to use this technology most effectively and reduce those problems. And that takes some doing. You have to support faculty who are doing it. I mean, a university like Tech is so far ahead of most universities that I think you get to be the leader in this. But we really have to help faculty and staff learn how to teach this best. Um, I, I I hear you about the hype. Um, I think there's also a great deal of what I call counter hype, and we've seen this, I think, since the beginning, where we have an established body of criticism, and some of that criticism comes in popular culture, where we see AI as terrifying, or AI programmers as terrible people. Movies like Ex Machina, for example. But we're seeing it in scholarship, where we have researchers who have done detailed analyses. So the idea of the stochastic parrot comes from a very, very powerful paper that predates ChatGPT 3.5. And the criticisms are pretty well known now. There are concerns, as you and I have been saying, about quality. There's concerns about bias and biased output.
Mhm.
There are also concerns about labor. That is, either there's concerns about the intellectual property that may be used without compensation, or workers who are paid to help develop guardrails for this are not getting paid enough or compensated enough. And there are other problems as well. But I think the counter hype is more durable than the hype. We're seeing more of it. And I think this plays out when you take a look at polls, which reveal that most people are pretty anxious or uncomfortable about AI.
Yes, I think that there's a lot of misleading information and also science fiction that has made these dystopic things like I don't remember the name of the machines or the things on Terminator, but it was
Hmm. Hmm.
uh,
Skynet.
Skynet exactly. So on Friday, I was in Mexico City in a press conference and about our IFE conference, which is our conference coming in January, that the big conference you've been before. And someone asked me about AI, and he asked me about if I expected how probable Skynet was to happen. I say, Well, I'm not sure that it will happen because of AI, because there's a lot of scary stuff going on in the world right now, but not necessarily
True.
related to AI. But I think we have to be. I'm a techno optimist, but I think that we have to build the things so that we don't make the mistakes that we have done in the past with maybe the World Wide Web or social media and other things, because we humans are very good to do those kind of things in the past.
Yes. Yes. I often think one possible future for AI is that we will quarantine it, that we will restrict it like we do with atomic weapons or with bioengineering, fields which we consider to be potentially very dangerous. And so it's actually really difficult to use them. I mean, that's one possible output, or one possible path. Uh, there are a lot of lessons we can learn from technology, and some of which we might not agree with. Uh, but I think most people have a. I mean, I think overall society is apprehending AI in a pretty mixed way. I don't think we're hurtling headlong with enthusiasm completely. I think there is a great deal of pushback, and I hear most of the pushback from the United States. This is where I see most of the criticism coming from. When I work with academics in North Africa, or in Asia, or in Latin America, people are more interested in practical details. How can I use this? What are the job implications? How can we use this in a university? But that may change. That may change.
That may change in the future. So I want to ask you one last question, Brian, and I want to challenge you on this question. So you can pick a window of time, whatever you want as a futurist, no, maybe 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever.
Hmm.
And tell me, what do you think are the three or whatever number you want, the biggest predictions for higher education or for education in general with the use of AI? What do you think will happen in that period of time? And maybe after that, how we prepare for that future? Because in general, we can create that future. And also, how we make that future happen, if or how we prevent the bad things to happen.
Well, that's a great question. Um, and I think a very easy forecast is that we should expect to see a lot of software produced that we can buy or license aimed specifically at education. So we saw this with Khan Academy, with Conmigo, but I would also expect to see more mentor bots available. So right now, I study languages using Duolingo, and there's AI built into that, which I can pay for. We should expect to see more of that, and perhaps aim narrowly at a given topic. A history bot, a physics bot. Think in India, there's this huge company, Physics Walla, that does nothing but teach physics. We could see something like that come about, but we also might see software that is aimed at students' mental health and their overall career. So, think about a sidekick, a friend, a mentor. And that might be something which a student might themselves purchase, or a university might license to be able to give to students. Uh, there are, of course, all kinds of benefits as well as risks to these. And one of the great risks that we would think about is replacing faculty or staff with software. And I think a lot of campuses around the world that are facing financial pressures might find this appealing, or at least something worth doing. Another, of course, is just these things getting software getting things wrong. So if it gives mental health advice that backfires, if it gives physics feedback that is incorrect, but at the same time, we have the capability to really enhance what our learners can do. So you think about students who might need help working their way through a huge university like UNAM, right, in Mexico City, which can be daunting if you're completely new to higher education. We could see it helping you with your careers or advising you on classes. And of course, being able to help students learn something at their convenience at 1 o'clock in the morning, helping with their history paper, 3 o'clock in the morning, helping with their physics assignment, and other benefits as well, being able to repeat things. So when I'm stuck on a hard verb to conjugate, I can really work over and over again with my software. whereas a human teacher might get burned out or exhausted or fed up with me at that point. And I think there are other possibilities. So I love that one of your four pillars is actually working with AI on the computer science side. And one of the things that I would hope to see is academics doing more productive work. So it might be something relatively easy, like producing GPT for a given topic, but it might be something bigger. So what happens if a university like Tech, and I'm just making this up now, might say download Llama and create something new that doesn't exist. So we've seen this in Japan, where there have been calls to produce a database and AI built on Japanese cultural history. And I mean, how great that would be to ask questions of that software. The Getty Museum in Los Angeles, in the United States, has an interesting tool where you can ask the Getty collection of art history questions, and it can produce images for you. How interesting it would be to see such non-commercial but intellectually exciting projects come about created by academics. That's that's my second forecast. I think that's a little bit unlikely, but I have hopes for it because there's a lot we can do with that. A third forecast to think about is how this changes research. So we have the capacity to use generative AI to do all kinds of helping functions in research. So it can help you draft a paper. It can help give you feedback on your paper. If you're trying to write a monograph, it can help structure your work. It can help you do some research. But also, it gives us the ability to do some new and interesting things. For example, for a monograph, can we use generative AI to produce indexes? That might save some time for faculty or researchers who don't have that capacity or who can't afford to pay a professional indexer. I saw one book that came out a few months ago that had a web page for the book, and in that web page was a bot that you could ask questions about the book, not just what's this book about, but to actually have a conversation with the book about its topics. So it's kind of like having the author available for a talk, but available at all times. Thinking about doing that for my next book. So that I think we should expect to see some interesting developments in AI along the publishing line and the research line.
Thank you, Brian. Very interesting exploration of the future. So what's with the window? Did you get the window of this? How many years do you see that happening?
I see that in the next 2 years.
2 years. Okay, that's very soon, in fact.
Well,
Thanks.
a lot of this is happening quickly, and a key thing that we need to keep in mind is that a lot of the investment, I mentioned tens of billions of dollars plowing into this, the investors are looking for returns. And most generative AI is not making money. OpenAI is losing money like crazy. So I think we should expect to see businesses trying to churn out something that can make money. And the academic market is one where people do make money. Scholarly publishers, textbook companies, ed tech companies, that's a proven market. So we should probably see that.
Very interesting. Well, let's talk. Well, before 2 years, but let's have a date in 2 years to see how things are doing.
I'd like that. I'd like that.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for this interesting conversation and for sharing your insight with us about the future of education, particularly the future of AI in education. I'm sure that this will be also a pleasure for our audience to hear.
Oh, my pleasure, Jose. It's always good to talk with you. And again, to work with Tech de Monterrey is always a good thing.
Thanks a lot, Brian. See you soon.
Okay. Take care.